morning, good evening, good day, good night, wherever you're dialing in. I appreciate you dialing in for another one of our videos. As always, we appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. Like and subscribe the video for any updates that you want to get concerning the channel. I'll be glad to send it to you as we post. Today we are looking at a particular person in Genesis that we're having dealings with when we were talking about Abraham and through searching for a wife for his son Isaac, and also a person that Jacob had to deal with, who is the son of Isaac. So this person that we're talking about, his name is Laban, and we're going to talk briefly about him and kind of get an idea, to kind of do a profile of him and how that relates to us today. Now, if you look in the book of Genesis, Laban he appears from chapter 24 and through 31 in various areas. Not completely in those chapters, but his name pops up. He's a person of interest, and he has dealings in throughout some portions of the chapters. So who is Laban? He is the brother of Isaac's wife, Rebekah. He's the eldest son in the family, and because he is the eldest son, he is the grown spokesman of his father, Bethuel, who was nephew to Abraham. So and that's very important, because that's who Abraham wanted his servant to go to his family and find a wife for his son in his own family. So, and Genesis 24:29 is where we first see first mention of Laban. Abraham sent his trusted servant. We don't know the name, but we believe Eleazar of Damascus may be that servant, since Abraham was willing to bestow upon him the inheritance, because at the time he did not have an heir. Anyway, so Abraham sends his most trusted servant back to his home country to find a wife for his son Isaac. And of course, we know the story where the servant was praying to God on behalf of Abraham and his son Isaac, and the Lord kind of moved that situation, and the servant found Rebekah, and Rebekah, when she was going to the well, she ran and told her father at the household about the news. And her brother, Laban, came out and welcomed the servant and invited him back in to stay with them. So through this process, we see that Laban was involved. When we look at 24, verses 50, 55, we see that Laban was involved in the decision to allow his sister to travel to this foreign country to marry a man she never met. So he kind of had a say-so in that. After that incident, that whole situation centered mostly around Isaac and Rebekah, and that situation where it's showing where God had moved the most trusted servant to help out and bless Isaac and his father Abraham. So we don't hear nothing else about Laban for another few years. Many years later, actually, when Isaac and and Rebekah sent their son Jacob off, because, as we know, Esau and Jacob were not getting along. Esau was very careless with his birthright. He gave up his birthright to Jacob, and then Jacob in turn deceived his blind father Isaac, for the most part, into giving him his blessing. So Rebekah thought it'd be a good idea that he leave town for a while. So Jacob was sent back to the relatives to find himself a wife, and we see that in Genesis 28:1-2. So he's going back, and of course we have the dream of where God speaks to Jacob. We see the staircase, or Jacob's ladder as is traditionally known, and God renews that promise and that covenant with Jacob, more of a reminder that, hey, I'm still going to honor this covenant that I gave to your grandfather and to your father, and I'm not giving up on you. So anyway, so we're going to go through that. And so he returned back to his mother's homeland. This is Rebekah's homeland now, and he meets Laban. He meets Laban's daughter, Rachel, and he falls in love with her. We see that in Genesis 29, where he fell in love with her, and Laban promised to give Rachel to Jacob if he would work for him for 7 years. Okay, so Jacob is in this place where he's got to work for 7 years. However, Laban was kind of a trickster, so to put it lightly. He agreed to this, or Jacob agreed to serve, and but Laban tricked Jacob and switched brides on the wedding night. And so Jacob woke up next morning and thinking that he spent the night and he got married to the apple of his eye, so to speak, the woman of his heart. Come to find out that he was married to Leah and not Rebecca. So he was very upset. He's like, "What do you?" Or his daughter. He's just Rachel. Excuse me, not Rebecca. Rachel. So he was very, very mad. But look at what Laban says. Laban says, "It is not our common here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one." So he had an excuse. He didn't say that, as far as we know, he didn't tell Jacob that before the wedding. He told him after the wedding was over, "Hey, you married Leah. You didn't marry the younger daughter." So in order for him to, for him to finish off and marry, because he was really in love with Rachel. He wanted Rachel, and he was still in love with Rachel, even though he was married to Leah. And so Laban's like, "Okay, all right. If you work for me another 7 years, you can have the hand of Rachel." So that was part of the deal. So finish off the bridal week, and then we'll give you the young one also in return for 7 more years of work. And that's in Genesis 29, 26, 27. So Laban is saying, "Well, you're already married, so finish off your wedding honeymoon, have a good time, but come back and work for me for 7 years, and then you can have my other daughter." So it was just a bad situation. So Jacob agreed for another 7 years. And after 14 years, Jacob had 2 wives. He had concubines, and he would have a bunch of children. So it just became such a mess. And then at the end of the 14 years, and he marries, Rachel, and they have the children. And about this time, Jacob's ready to go home. He's ready to head back to his homeland. He's got wives, he's got servants, he's got children, a bunch of children, and he's wealthy. He's got herds of sheep, he's got donkeys, he's got livestock. And Laban was blessed with that. And we see that, because we see that as we go, and he's ready to go. He was just, Jacob was ready to get out of town. So he was ready to start his own life. What came to be, looking for a bride, looking for a wife, turned out to be a 20-year occupation under somebody else. Yeah, they're family, but Laban never treated him like family. So we see that in Genesis 31, 38, that relationship was completely different. Despite that, God was still blessing Jacob where he was. Now, Abraham indicates that Laban's sons however, God blessed Jacob because Jacob was his choice to carry on the covenant he made with his grandfather Abraham. Genesis 28 and Genesis 31 talk about this. It indicates that Laban's sons were jealous of Jacob because how much God had prospered him. So they were very jealous of everything of Jacob. They said, "Jacob has taken everything our father's own, has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father." And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude kind of changed towards him. So then the Lord said to Jacob, "There's nothing really you can do. You need to get up and go home." So we have 7 years. He thought he was marrying Rachel, but he ended up marrying Leah. And then 7 more years, he's sitting there and he has to work again for Rachel. And then when he approaches Laban and says, look, man, I got to go home. I got to do something. What else more do you have? And Laban's like, well, if you leave, what's in it for me? I don't have anything. What do you want me to pay you? And Jacob says, no, you don't have to pay me anything. I don't want anything. I got everything. But in order to work out an agreement, he agreed to stay 6 more years in order to go through the livestock and separate them through the spotted and the unblemished sheep. And that we went over that in the Bible lesson plan, I think, last week. And we see that God is still blessing Jacob, regardless of what's going on here. The deal was made with Laban for those additional 6 years to his benefit. And Laban still did not, he still connived against Jacob. He still connived to take more than what he was getting blessed. So it's unreal. It really is. But God still blessed Jacob and everything that he was doing. Now, the reason why Laban didn't want to let him go, well, it's real simple. He knew through divination, when we read the scriptures, we see that Laban is very aware that Jacob is blessed through God, and he doesn't want to let him go. So, well, if he knows that, he's afraid to let him go. He's fearful of letting go his cash cow, so to speak. He doesn't want that person who is blessed, because obviously the blessings that Jacob are getting, he is benefiting from, and he doesn't want to do that. But then finally the Lord says to Jacob in a dream, he tells him, go back to your land, to your father and your relatives, and I'll be with you. So, and if we remember, when we look back at that dream with Jacob's ladder, so to speak, or staircase, we see that that's part of what God had promised him, that he would return home. And he would be with him no matter where he was, but he would bring him back home. So, fearful that Laban would take everything that he had, Jacob fled in the middle of the night. He took all that he owned, which was his wives, his children, his servants, whatever livestock was his after that agreement was made between the blemished and the unblemished. However, one thing that Jacob did not know is that Rachel had stolen her father's household idols. We see that in Genesis 31, 19 and 34. So I think that kind of tells me that Rachel really didn't believe in Jacob's God. She was not as faithful as he was. Leah would turn out, in my opinion, to be more of a faithful wife, so to speak, and more of an understanding wife than Rachel was. Rachel kind of comes across as a little bit spoiled, in my opinion. So now, when Laban learned of the departure of Jacob and his family, he pursued them. He went after them, and he caught up with them, and he rebuked Jacob for sneaking off. But then, he said, look, I want my idols back. You took my idols. But Jacob knew nothing about that, of Rachel's theft, and he scolded Laban for accusing him of that. He's like, I have no... It got to be I can imagine the argument. Laban's accusing him of theft of idols, but Laban also knew through divination, which is a bad practice, and God does not confirm or approve of. So if he knew that he was being blessed by God, why would Jacob need idols? But nonetheless, Jacob didn't know what he was talking about, and so. I think that it got to probably in a shouting match, and it could have come to blows. It got to that point, but Laban never found his idols, and chances are Rachel held on to those and kept those around her household, and that's it. We don't hear nothing else about that. So the last mention of Laban in the Bible is after he rebuked Jacob for disappearing without notice. After their exchange, Laban suggested that they make a covenant, and we see that in Genesis 31:44. This overture appears to be motivated, I think, by the fear of Jacob that Jacob may return harm to him. We see it in verses 52. Although there was no indication that Laban worshiped the Lord, he did hold a healthy fear of him and invoke the same name of Jacob's God in forming the covenant between him. And we see that in Genesis 30, 31, 49, 50. So Laban and Jacob share a meal, and Laban kissed the children, grandchildren, and returned home. So after said goodbyes, Jacob and his family were free to continue on their journey God had given them to return to his home. So, and that's all we hear about that. Now, what was so important about Laban that we would probably make a video about? Well, I prayed about it and I was thinking about it because Laban is a figure that has shown up on more than one of our Sunday school topic and series. And I think God pressed upon me to kind of dig in a little bit deeper on the person. Now, Laban obviously is not after God's own heart. He's not saved, so to speak. He's not a child of God. He's not called upon God, nothing like that. But at the same time, God is not really cursing him, not angry with Laban. I think God is kind of indifferent on the situation. I think in the situation with Jacob, Jacob kind of met his match with a cunning and duplicitous personality in Laban. So he kind of faced off on against his own nature. And so Jacob had to deal with someone who was just like him. And that proved to be a nuisance for the most part. He was just as conniving and deceitful as Jacob was before God called him and turned him around. So how does Laban apply to you and me today? Because when I look at the videos that I try to make and I look at the Bible and I read God's word, I know there's something in God's word that tells me that this is applicable to me in my life today and in your life today. How is Laban applicable to us today? Well, look at the situations that you're in. We have people who are like Laban in our lives who either use us or benefit from us, benefit from our works, and our gifts and our toils and those kind of things. The people in our lives that are similar to Laban can be our bosses, our supervisors. It could be our family. It could be family members. It could be brothers and sisters. It could be friends. And what I mean by that is people that are in our lives who are not Christians, who are not saved, and who have other means. They have other interests other than faith. They may talk of God. They may say they know God, but work may be more interesting to them, or business, or money, finances, or anything, fishing, hunting, something like that. And all that their dealings are to their benefit and their benefit alone. But at the same time, wherever you are, God is going to use you where He has you planted. And that's the point I want to make to you today. The job that you're at may not be ideal, and it may not be where you want to stay. It may be that you're praying for God to open up a door or a situation or an opportunity for you to move on to something better. I get that. I really do. And most of the time, God's timetable does not match up with ours. We want something immediate, and that's understandable. However, as we see with Jacob and Laban, that situation that Jacob was kind of stuck in took about 20 years to get out of. And I know that could be discouraging. However, what God is telling us is we got to be patient, because wherever we are planted, let God use you to be fruitful and be a blessing to others. And that's what I want to tell you. You're going to have Labans in your life all the time, okay? And they may be your supervisors. They may be your boss. They may be your grandparents, your parents, or it may be your friends, your brothers, your aunts, your uncles, That's fine. Wherever you're planted and you just feel like you get frustrated, look around you and see how God is blessing you in the midst of your toil. Okay? That's what I want to tell you today. So when you look at your situations and you look at someone like Laban that Jacob has to deal with, I want you to also ask yourself, who in my life is my Laban? Who is the person that I've got to deal with, that I got to work with, that I got to tolerate while I'm in this situation? Because when God uses you, He's going to use you in a spot that you don't necessarily have a choosing. Okay? And He wants you to thrive in those circumstances, in that adversity. And that's what this is all about. Okay? Laban benefited from Jacob. So your Laban's going to benefit from you. One way or another, that's what's going to happen. But above all, God's going to bless that issue. God's going to bless that situation because He's using you in that situation. Okay? Thank you for watching. I appreciate you dialing in for another one of our videos. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below the video, and we'll be glad to get back to you at our earliest convenience. We would like to invite you to come and spend a worship service with here at Webb Baptist. We meet on Sunday mornings for Sunday school. Then we have worship service. Wednesday nights, we have fellowship dinner, and then we have Bible study soon after. If you cannot make it to Webb Baptist, please get involved in a Bible-based church wherever you are and get plugged in at that church, get plugged in that ministry. I guarantee you that church family will be a blessing to you and you will be a blessing to them. I guarantee it. God's got a plan for you. Let's use that plan. Despite the Labans in our life, God's going to use you and you're going to thrive. I promise. Until next time, take care and God bless.